Are you a serial procrastinator? Do you think that you procrastinate because you are lazy, or because of bad time management, or because you don't have enough discipline? Procrastination is a common issue, which occurs when people unnecessarily postpone decisions or actions, generally despite knowing that doing so will likely affect them negatively. The most common reason for procrastination has nothing to do with laziness, bad time management, or even the lack of self-discipline. Contrary to popular belief, procrastination is largely caused by fear, meaning that people procrastinate because they're afraid of something, such as failing or being criticized. For example, if a person delays doing a task because they're afraid of failing, even though it would be better for them just to do the task, then that person is procrastinating due to the fear of failure. The association between fear and procrastination is complex and can have serious implications, so it's important to understand it. In this video, you'll learn more about how fear and procrastination are connected and see what you can do about this practice. This is how fear can cause procrastination. Fear generally causes procrastination by serving as a powerful emotional deterrent, which makes people more adverse to certain tasks, and causes these people to delay taking action as a way to delay whatever it is they're afraid of. For example, if a person is afraid to fail on a task, they might postpone the task as a way of delaying dealing with the fear. Coping with fear through this type of avoidance can help the procrastinator protect their mood in the short term by helping them postpone the things that they're afraid of. However, in the long term, this generally hurts them more than it helps for several reasons. Procrastinating doesn't solve the fear, but rather only postpones the point at which the procrastinator has to deal with it. Procrastinating can give the fear time to grow and become worse, which can increase the negative emotions associated with it. Procrastination can give rise to new negative emotions, such as frustration, guilt, and shame. Procrastinating can lead to various other issues, such as increased stress, increased interpersonal conflicts, and failure to achieve goals. The following are common fears that can cause procrastination. Fear of failure. For example, this fear can play a role when a student worries that they'll fail the test, so they avoid studying for the test to avoid thinking about it. Fear of failure is the most common type of fear that's researched and mentioned as a cause of procrastination. Fear of negative evaluation. For example, this fear can play a role when someone worries that they will get judgment feedback or harsh criticism on their performance during a public presentation, so they delay preparing for it in order to avoid thinking about it. Note that this fear has to do with how someone's performance will be evaluated by others, rather than about the actual quality of the performance. This means, for example, that someone might worry that they'll receive negative feedback even if they're likely to do well, because they lack confidence or have low self-esteem. Fear of rejection. For example, this fear can play a role when someone worries that their job application or romantic proposal will be rejected, so they delay submitting the application or making the proposal. Fear of regret. For example, this fear can play a role when someone worries that they'll make a decision that they'll regret in the future, so they postpone making the decision for as long as they can. Fear of success. For example, this fear can play a role when an entrepreneur worries that if their new business does well, then they'll feel compelled to take more risk and step out of their comfort zone, so they delay launching their business. Fear of change. For example, this fear can play a role when someone worries about that once they commit to a certain decision, then the routine that they're used to in life will change, which frightens them. Fear of the unknown. For example, this fear can play a role when someone worries about going to practice a new sport or hobby when they don't know what it will involve. Some of these fears overlap in some senses, as in the case of fear of rejection and the fear of negative evaluation, with which both generally resolve around fear of other people's negative reactions. In addition, a person can be influenced by multiple fears at the same time, often with regard to the same thing. For example, a student might be worrying about both receiving a bad grade on their homework assignment and about being criticized for it by their teacher or mocked for it by their peers. Finally, additional fears beyond these can also cause people to procrastinate, such as fear of disappointing others, fear of disapproval, fear of asking for help, and fear of a specific individual, like the teacher or parent. For example, people might procrastinate due to a fear of missing out. For example, when a student postpones writing a paper because they're afraid of missing out on a social event with their friends. The fears that people have on the surface are often driven by deeper underlying fears. These fears, in turn, can often be traced back to the fears of negative emotions such as guilt and shame, which can lead to unpleasant emotional pain. For example, a student who's afraid of failing a test might actually be afraid of feeling stupid and of being ashamed of their abilities. Similarly, an author who's afraid of a book being unsuccessful might actually be afraid of other people's thinking that the author is talentless, which in turn would hurt the author emotionally. These fears are often irrational for various reasons, such as that the negative outcome that people are afraid of is unlikely or unlikely to influence them as much as they worry it will. For example, someone might be irrationally afraid of getting harsh criticism even though they're unlikely to actually receive such criticism, or even though this criticism won't matter to them in reality. This issue often occurs due to catastrophizing, a phenomenon where people imagine terrible outcomes from their actions and overestimate the likelihood of those outcomes. Fear is not only a potential cause for procrastination, but also a potential consequence of it, meaning that procrastination can perpetuate and exacerbate existing fears, as well as create new ones. This can lead to a fear-procrastination cycle where some fear leads a person to procrastinate, which in turn makes them more afraid of the same thing, which in turn causes them to keep procrastinating due to their fear, and so on. For example, this type of cycle can occur when someone is afraid of doing badly on a task, so they procrastinate on it, which makes them have to rush to complete it before the deadline, which leads them to do badly. This makes them afraid that they'll do badly on similar tasks in the future, which leads them to procrastinate again, and so on. In addition, fear procrastination cycles can also occur in other ways. For example, if someone is afraid of change, they might procrastinate on something that can lead to change. For example, like asking for a job promotion, which can get them more used to the status quo and consequently more afraid of the change. Similarly, if someone is afraid of rejection, they might procrastinate on something that can lead to rejection, which can give them more time to obsess over the potential rejection by imagining embarrassing ways it could happen, which can make them more afraid of it. The relationship between fear and procrastination can be influenced by other factors, such as people's self-efficacy. This means, for example, that if someone's self-efficacy is high enough, they may be able to get started on time, even if their fear would otherwise push them to procrastinate. However, the influence of such factors can also mean that if someone's self-efficacy is low enough, then they'll be driven to procrastination by even small fears, which wouldn't dictate most people's behavior. Furthermore, certain factors can also increase people's tendency to be afraid. These include the personality trait of neuroticism, which reflects the tendency to be prone to negative emotions and psychological stress, as well as associated issues, such as low self-esteem and high self-doubt. Finally, note that people can procrastinate for many reasons other than fear, such as anxiety, perfectionism, depression, and ADHD. Taken together, this all means that not everyone who procrastinates does so because they're afraid of something, and that not everyone who's afraid of something will procrastinate on it. How to overcome procrastination? Overcoming procrastination can be a slow process, but it can be very rewarding in the long run. Try to listen to your inner voice when you're procrastinating. Try to identify the underlying fears that is causing you to procrastinate. Address these fears. For example, if you're worried that you'll encounter some obstacle in your work, then you can figure out exactly how you'll deal with that obstacle should you encounter it. Similarly, if you're afraid of something bad happening, then you can think about how you'll cope with it and you'll move on afterward. Try to have an inner conversation. Do not let your inner fears run amok. They're mostly irrational, so just being conscious of them alone can make them lose their power over you.